It's one of the fastest growing diseases, and it is far more likely to affect women than men. It is Alzheimer's disease, and there is some incredible research being done on the causes and the potential treatments of Alzheimer's at the Scripps Research Institute in Jupiter. I'm happy to be joined today by neuroscience professor Dr. Ron Davis, who has helped develop the neuroscience department at Scripps. No small task, indeed. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us.
My pleasure to be here.
What do we know about the causes of Alzheimer's?
There's really two basic forms of Alzheimer's disease. One is called early onset disease, and that is a genetic disease. And we know of several different genes that if you have mutations in those genes, you will get Alzheimer's disease, generally in the 50s or early 60s. That accounts for maybe a few % of all the AD or Alzheimer's cases. The other more major cases is a kind of sporadic or late onset. And there, the exact cause is still not known. The genetic causes we know because there are certain genes that actually cause the disease. Sporadic is still uncertain as to what actually precipitates the disease, but what we do have is we know several things that change in the brain, pathological changes with AD in both types of Alzheimer's disease.
So if you have that gene that will cause early onset, is there a way to know that when you go through genetic testing? And then is there a way to stop it from happening?
The answer to the first question is yes. You can basically get your DNA sequenced and you could find out, do you have that gene and will you get Alzheimer's disease? That's known. Is there a way to stop it? No, there's not.
Wow. And when do you think that might happen? Is that something, like the research you all are doing, is that something that will lead to that one day?
We hope so. Certainly many of us throughout in Jupiter, at Scripps, and throughout the country, neuroscientists are really trying to understand the causes and really develop preventatives or therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease. It's a complex disorder. The brain is extraordinarily complex, and so it's not something you look at and we know we're going to solve tomorrow. But science is such that you never know when you're going to have a breakthrough. And so there could be a huge breakthrough that occurs tomorrow, or a week from now, or a month, that leads us along a new path to a potential new therapy or preventative, or of course the end game is a cure for the disorder.
Let's talk about the reasons why the numbers are going up. Why?
Well, I think it's probably more awareness of Alzheimer's disease, which is great. It's certainly part of the aging population that we have, the baby boomers.
And we're living longer.
Exactly
right.
Exactly. I'm part of that population.
Yeah,
and as aging is the dominant factor that predisposes one to Alzheimer's disease. So certainly with the aging population, we're going to get more and more cases of Alzheimer's disease in our country.
But more women than men? And why would that be?
Well, women, yes, there's more women have Alzheimer's than men. Whether that's due to an actual increased susceptibility in women versus men, which is possible. Certainly part of that's due to the fact that women live longer. And so you just have more cases of AD because women are living longer than men are. So that accounts for a part of it. Whether it accounts for all of it, no one knows.
In layman's terms, what is your research involving? If it can be put in layman's terms, I don't even know. What are you working on, and what is the end goal? Besides a cure, I know.
Sure. There's a toxic protein that's released in all of our brains, more so in Alzheimer's brains, called A-beta 42. This toxic protein accumulates outside of neurons into what's called amyloid plaque.
I've heard of that.
And it also finds its way inside neurons, and it causes havoc to neurons. One of the things it does in neurons is it makes its way to a small part of the neuron called mitochondria. Now, mitochondria are the energy-producing parts of the neuron. And the goal there, or the hypothesis is, what's happening is A-beta is messing up, disturbing mitochondria. Mitochondria can't make the energy necessary, the ATP necessary for the neuron to work, and neurons inevitably will die in that situation. So we are working and have in hand some molecules that seem to preserve or enhance mitochondrial function in certain situations. And so we've screened for and have some new molecules that we are hoping might eventually enhance mitochondrial function during the disease and stave off the disease for at least a few years or even a decade.
Wow. Is it totally unique to Alzheimer's disease, or because it's the brain and there's so much to it? I mean, this can open the door and help find a cure for many other neurodegenerative diseases, correct?
That's a terrific question. So you're asking, are mitochondria specific to Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah.
Actually, no. So it turns out mitochondria become defective in ALS.
There you go.
And in Parkinson's disease, in Huntington's disease. Those are all neurological, neurodegenerative disorders, but they also become defective in psychiatric disorders like mood disorders and bipolar disorder and mood disorder and ADHD and autism. So it seems to be a commonality that occurs across brain disorders, and that's part of the reason we're very interested in focusing on that one target for new therapeutics.
Oh my gosh, imagine, you know, the mysteries that can be solved.
We hope so.
And this painstaking process, it's just incredible. It must be thrilling for you.
It's just a great ride. Being a scientist is a lot of fun trying to solve these problems, because this is something we have to do in our society. Right. Alzheimer's, as you know, Big Pharma is pulling out of drug discovery for brain disorders, and especially Alzheimer's disease, because they have spent so much money in clinical trials for things that have failed over the last decade or so. And so they decided that we need to basically work on simpler problems. But we can't just walk away from this problem.
No.
It's a growing problem, and so we have to continue to try to solve that problem.
Let's talk about things that people at home might be able to do, the changes they might be able to institute. I think, you know, you can read, the Alzheimer's Association has some great tips. There are tips everywhere. What do you recommend? What do you think is the most important things we should be doing to preserve our brains?
Well, it comes back to you have to use it or lose it. And so the best thing you could do right now for the aging brain or for the Alzheimer's brain or for any issue with brain health is both physical and mental activity. Both types. Mental activity, learn something new, learn a new foreign language, play cards, learn to play bridge. Physical activity, going dancing is very, very good for...
Really? Dancing?
Dancing is thought to be one of the better activities simply because it engages lots of sensory systems, your vision, you have a partner, you have to coordinate with your partner, you have to be, hopefully not step on your partner's toes, and you move, you have nice music in the background. So dance is thought to be one of the better physical activities to help stave off these disorders.
Oh, Arthur Murray was onto something all those years ago. Who knows? What about music? Sometimes you hear about music therapy and that sort of thing.
I think music just is, it makes us all feel good.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially, you know, for me, rock and roll music from the 1960s. Really, the music we grew up with, it makes us feel terrific. And so I think that's part of it, just makes us feel good.
The social interaction. And in this society, we are becoming more and more isolated. And you feel, certainly for the elderly population, that in many cases, they're very isolated. How much is that affecting your brain?
There is evidence, there are scientific studies that show that social engagement is protective for Alzheimer's and for memory loss during aging. So it's actually very good. So if you're a very social person, you go out, that's a terrific thing to be involved in.
So I'm starting to see maybe groups of people going and taking dancing lessons.
There you go.
You combine them both.
There you go. That's
absolutely. Great. What about our environment? How much do we think that's playing a role?
That's a hard question to answer because any brain disorder, whether we talk about mood disorders, bipolar or Alzheimer's disease, it comes down to two factors. Really, there's a genetic aspect. We all can have genes that either cause a disease or make us susceptible to a disorder. And then there's an environmental component. The genetic component is an easier one to solve right now. And as a scientist, you always look for what are the problems you can solve and what are the problems that we don't have enough information to solve yet. We know the human genome, we know the sequence, we know all the genes generally in the human genome, so we can solve the genetics of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. Environment, one doesn't know where to go. In my mind, there are some scientists that study the environment, but is it really infection during the third trimester of pregnancy, or is it a trauma during childhood, or something else across the environment, environmental toxin? It's hard. There's so many things that one can point to. That is going to be a larger problem to solve after the genetics of Alzheimer's is solved.
Wow. What about something simple as the food we eat, taking certain supplements? Is there anything that we should be doing that maybe we're not doing? I mean, I know you've got to do things that lead to a healthy overall body. It'll help your brain as well. But is there anything specific? I'm looking for that one little nugget that you're going to say, yeah, take this vitamin from now on and you're not going to get it.
Yeah, I think probably the best thing you do is omega-3 oils, basically. But, you know, all the supplements that exist, there are randomized clinical trials. Trials have been done for all the nutrients that you can take and find it. And you find some studies that say, yes, there is a beneficial effect of ginkgo, for example.
Right.
And no, there's not a beneficial effect. Now, is that due to the fact that the effect is very small? And so it has effect in some populations and not others? Is it due to the fact that one study had a population of individuals that were basically receptive to that and the other is not?
Right, wow.
One doesn't know. So as a scientist, I've looked across all those things, and I can't really point my finger on anything and say, yes, I'm willing to do that, and I think it's important for me to do it. So
isn't that interesting? It's incredible, the research you're doing. It all starts with that basic science. It's just amazing.
Well, thank you. It's just understanding how the brain works is really where you start. And then once you understand enough of the information, how the brain works and what goes awry, you need to basically understand brain function and dysfunction, then you can start thinking about therapeutics. And we are at that stage right now in neuroscience to really seriously think about Alzheimer's therapeutics in a more constructive way. We probably weren't 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but we are now.
Hope out there, and I can imagine that some impressive discoveries are going to be coming out of the Scripps Research Institute. So let's continue the funding. I know that's what you all really need is the funding to keep the research going. Thank you. Right?
If you want me to comment, it's absolutely true.
That's right.
There's been more recognition. We need more funding, so the federal government has stepped up a bit. But just to give you an example, right now the federal government basically allocates about $1.8 billion per year to Alzheimer's research. The cost of Alzheimer's across the country per year is about more than $250 billion. So right now it's an expenditure of less than 1% of the cost of AD in our country.
Such an incredible need. Well, thank you for all your good work and your years of hard work.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more right after this.